We're joined by Fred Tecce. He's a former U.S. prosecutor now at his own boutique litigation firm, McShea Tecce. Welcome to In Business. Explain for me here. This is clearly a very calculating, very careful man, knows how he's phrasing things. What is the difference between willful blindness and proactive complicitness on the part of these banks?
Well, what he's doing, he's a lot of things. He's all the things that you mentioned, but he's also devious and he's smart and he's as dishonest as they come. What he's saying is that these institutional investors turned a blind eye and failed to find the discrepancies between his regulatory filings and the information that they were receiving, and that somehow that they're now responsible. Because you have to understand, there are a multitude of lawsuits against these banks and against his family by people who lost money as a result of his engaging in the largest Ponzi scheme in the history of the Republic. And in order for us to prevail, for the plaintiffs to win in those cases, one of the defenses that the bank would have is that we didn't know and there was no way for us to know. In other words, what the people who are trying to get money from these institutional investors are saying is that you knew or should have known. And by his saying this, he basically is trying to strip them of that defense. And he's also trying to help his family, because he's saying, my family knew nothing, and the family's going to, their defense is going to be, we knew nothing. Bernie said we knew nothing, but Bernie's saying that these banks knew. So it wasn't our fault that people lost money. It was the institutional investors. And as far as I'm concerned, this is a load of hogwash. First of all, he had an opportunity to provide information. He refused to do it with the U.S. attorney. Now, facing basically a life sentence, he wants to come off and tell his story. I'm sorry, I ain't buying it.
Well, he said in this interview, he made the point that he did agree to work with prosecutors only to recover assets and not to provide them with criminal evidence. Why do that? Is that simply to, as you are suggesting, push attention away from his family?
Correct. That's in my opinion, Margaret, that's exactly why he did it. First of all, as a former federal prosecutor, I got to tell you, guys like Bernie Madoff don't get to make rules like that. They don't get to say where the lines are drawn. The government does. And when you're convicted, you're supposed to cooperate fully in anything that the government asks you. And I also think he was trying to protect his family. And if I was still a prosecutor, I would be hounding this guy. I would be following the money. And if it went to his family, if it went to his grandchildren, I'd seize their big wheels. I mean, this guy is just, I'm sorry. I mean, I know we're on Bloomberg, but I think what this guy does is outrageous. And quite frankly, I'm enraged that someone has given him estates and they'll say these kind of things.
Why do you think he decided to allow the New York Times reporter to use his comments on the record? They've been in correspondence. She said she had been exchanging emails, but it was only now that he said she could make the information public.
Because I think what he's trying to do is he's trying to continue to help people avoid the responsibility for what happened. You know, what's fascinating to me is he says these institutional investors and these banks turned a blind eye, but the two largest associates, was it Wilpon and was it Katz or someone else, those people, although more intimately involved with him than anyone else, knew nothing by Bernie's admission. That's obscene. That's ridiculous.
So what's the next step here for prosecutors? If you're picking up the New York Times today and you're reading this, what are you thinking as a lawyer?
Well, I'm not sure what the next step, Margaret, would be for the prosecutors, but if I'm the lawyers involved in the case, I mean, I'm just scratching my head and rolling my eyes and saying, you got to be kidding me. I mean, if I'm defending the banks, I now got to deal with this. I mean, ultimately, you knew you were going to have to deal with it in the beginning. If you're the lawyers who are going after the family, you know, your attitude is it's more of the same, and you know, you're going to undermine the guy. I mean, quite frankly, in a court of law, when he has to testify and put his hand on the Bible and tell some jury this story, it ain't going anywhere.
Yeah, well, the thing everyone else wants him to share is the names of the banks and hedge funds he's trying to implicate here.
Hey, how about sharing the bank accounts where you stashed the cash that belonged to the victims, if you want to help?
All right.
So,
Fred, thank you. The always fiery Fred Tecce. Thanks for weighing in.
Thanks for having me, Margaret.